Aurelia's stomach cramped with hunger as she clutched the final piece of bread against her chest, watching the stranger collapse face first into the muddy main street of Willowbrook. Blood seeped from a gash on his temple, mixing with the October rain that turned the dirt road into a treacherous bog. The townspeople hurried past, pulling their coats tighter, averting their eyes from the fallen man whose torn clothes and wild beard marked him as another drifter seeking his fortune in the California goldfields. "Leave him be, Aurelia," called Mrs. Hemley from her covered porch. "Nothing but trouble comes from helping vagabonds." But Aurelia Brightwater had never been one to follow the safe path. At 19, she'd already buried her parents and watched her family's farm slip away to creditors, leaving her with nothing but a job scrubbing floors at the town's only inn, and this last morsel of bread she'd saved from yesterday's meager wages. She knelt beside the stranger, her worn skirts soaking up the muddy water. His face was gaunt, cheekbones sharp as knife edges beneath sun-weathered skin. When she pressed her fingers to his throat, his pulse fluttered weak and rapid. "Sir, can you hear me?" His eyes opened startling blue against his dirt-streaked face. They focused on her with difficulty, confusion clouding his gaze. "Water," he whispered, voice rough as sandpaper. Aurelia helped him sit against the weathered fence post outside Gideon's General Store. She tore her bread in half, though her empty stomach protested, and offered him the larger piece. "I can't," he began, but she pressed it into his trembling hands. "When did you last eat?" He stared at the bread as if it were made of gold. 3 days, maybe 4. "Then eat." As he devoured the bread with desperate gratitude, Aurelia studied his face. Beneath the grime and exhaustion, she glimpsed something noble, intelligent eyes, strong hands despite their current weakness, and a way of carrying himself that spoke of better days. "What's your name?" she asked softly. "Caspian," he said, meeting her gaze. "Caspian Vale, and you're either an angel or the kindest soul in this godforsaken territory." "Neither, just someone who knows what it means to be hungry." Thunder rolled across the mountains as the storm intensified. Aurelia glanced toward the inn, knowing she'd face Hoskins' wrath for being late, but she couldn't abandon this man to die in the street. "Can you stand?" "There's a shelter behind the church. It's not much, but it's dry." Caspian struggled to his feet, swaying dangerously. Without hesitation, Aurelia ducked under his arm, supporting his weight despite her own slender frame. Together, they stumbled through the downpour toward the small wooden structure that served as refuge for traveling missionaries. As she helped him settle onto a pile of old horse blankets, Caspian caught her hand. "Why?" he asked. "Why help a stranger when you clearly have so little yourself?" Aurelia paused at the doorway, raindrops cascading from her dark hair. "Because kindness costs nothing, and we're all just strangers to someone." She disappeared into the storm, leaving Caspian staring after her, something profound stirring in his chest beyond mere gratitude. 3 weeks later, Caspian had recovered enough to work splitting wood for the church and helping old Pastor Whitmore with repairs. His strength returned gradually, along with glimpses of the man he'd been before misfortune struck. He spoke little of his past, but Aurelia sensed education in his careful speech and grace in his movements when he thought no one was watching. She brought him meals when she could, spare them leftover biscuits from the inn, apples she'd bartered from Farmer Kellaway, once a precious jar of honey she'd been saving for winter. They would sit on the church steps in the evenings, talking about everything except the hunger that gnawed at both their bellies. "You remind me of someone," he told her one sunset evening, watching her darn a hole in her only good stockings. "Oh? Someone back home? My sister, Cordelia? She had your same way of seeing light in dark places." His voice carried old pain. "She died of fever 2 winters ago. That's when that's when I lost my way." Aurelia set down her mending. What did you do before? I was a banker's son in Boston. Cordelia and I were to inherit father's business, but when she passed, he shrugged, the gesture holding volumes of grief. I gave it all away and came west, looking for something I couldn't name. Found nothing but empty pockets and emptier promises, and now? Now I found something worth returning for. The way he looked at her made Aurelia's heart flutter like a trapped bird. She'd grown fond of their evening conversations, of the way his eyes crinkled when he almost smiled, of how he listened to her dreams of someday opening a school for children whose families couldn't afford proper education. But the next morning, she woke to find him gone. Pastor Whitmore handed her a letter written on brown paper in careful script. Dearest Aurelia, I must go north to the mining camps. I have nothing to offer you now but my gratitude, but I swear by all that's holy, I will return to you a man worthy of your kindness. Keep that generous heart safe until I can properly treasure it. Yours always, C.V. Aurelia pressed the letter to her chest and wept, not just for his leaving, but for the way he'd crept into her heart without her realizing it. Winter came early that year, brutal and unforgiving. The inn closed temporarily when Hoskins fell ill, leaving Aurelia without work. She survived on charity from Pastor Whitmore and odd jobs for the few families who could afford help. At night, she would reread Caspian's letter by candlelight, wondering if he was warm, if he was safe, if he remembered the girl who'd shared her last bread with a stranger. Spring arrived with no word from him. Then summer, with its promise of better times that never quite materialized for folks like her. By autumn, even Pastor Whitmore gently suggested she might consider accepting young Timothy Fletcher's persistent marriage proposals. He's a good man with steady work at the mill, the pastor said kindly, and you've waited long enough for dreams that might never come true. But Aurelia couldn't shake the conviction that somewhere in the vast wilderness, Caspian Vale was fighting his way back to her. She'd felt something pass between them in those quiet evenings, a recognition deeper than mere attraction, a sense of two souls finding their missing pieces. She would wait a little longer. 2 years passed like seasons through a widow's window slowly, with too much time to think and remember. Aurelia had taken a position as schoolmistress in the new schoolhouse Willowbrook had finally built, fulfilling at least part of her dreams. She taught 15 children ranging from 5 to 14 years old, their faces bright with the hunger for knowledge she recognized in herself. The work paid modestly but steadily, allowing her to rent a small room above the bakery and even save a few precious coins each month. She told herself she was saving for a better future, but in her heart, she knew she was waiting for Caspian's return. Letters occasionally arrived in Willowbrook traders, brought mail from the mining camps when they remembered, and sometimes the stagecoach delivered bundles of correspondence from far-off places. Each time, Aurelia's heart would leap, then sink when nothing bore her name in that careful script she'd memorized. Perhaps he found his fortune and forgot about a poor girl. In a nowhere town, Mrs. Henley said unkindly one day at the general store, "Rich men don't come back for their charity cases." Aurelia simply smiled and continued selecting apples for her students' lunch. But the words stung because they echoed her own growing fears. Had she been foolish to read so much into a few weeks of evening conversations? Had his gratitude been mistaken for something deeper? In her 3rd year of teaching, a traveling merchant named Josiah Crane brought disturbing news from the northern camps. A terrible avalanche had buried an entire settlement near Prospector's Gulch. Dozens were dead, many more missing and presumed lost in the mountain wilderness. "Terrible business," Crane said, shaking his grizzled head. "Wipe that camp clean. Off the map. Nothing left but broken dreams and unmarked graves." That night, Aurelia sat by her window watching the stars, allowing herself to finally grieve. If Caspian had been in those camps, and where else would a desperate man seeking fortune have gone? Then he was likely dead, his promise to return buried under tons of snow and stone. She pulled out his letter, now soft from handling, and read it one final time before folding it away in her hope chest. Tomorrow, she decided, she would accept Timothy Fletcher's proposal. He was indeed a good man, steady and kind, if not the grand passion she'd dreamed of. It was time to be practical, but as she prepared for bed, movement on the street below caught her eye. A fine carriage had stopped outside the inn, unusual for Willowbrook, which rarely saw such elegant transportation. A man in expensive coat stepped down, his movements familiar despite the years between. Aurelia's breath caught in her throat. Even in the moonlight, even changed by prosperity and time, she would know that silhouette anywhere. Caspian Vale had returned to Willowbrook, but he wasn't alone. A woman in traveling clothes emerged from the carriage after him, young, beautiful, and wearing the unmistakable confidence of wealth and position. She took his arm with the easy familiarity of a wife, and together they walked toward the inn's glowing windows. Aurelia stepped back from her window, her hand pressed to her mouth to stifle the sob that threatened to escape. He had returned as promised. But not for her. Aurelia barely slept that night, her mind churning with questions and her heart breaking with each imagined scene of Caspian's new life. She rose before dawn and prepared for school with trembling hands, determined to maintain her dignity despite the chaos in her chest. The morning brought whispers throughout Willowbrook. Mrs. Henley, her tongue always ready with gossip, cornered Aurelia at the pump outside the schoolhouse. "Did you see that fancy carriage last night? Word is, it belongs to some railroad magnate from California. Caspian Vale calls himself. Made millions in the gold fields, and now he's building tracks across half the territory." Her eyes glittered with malicious curiosity. "Course, nobody remembers any Vale from around here. Probably just another carpetbagger with more money than sense." Aurelia's hand shook as she filled her water bucket. "Perhaps he's just passing through. Perhaps. Though Hoskins says he asked particularly about the schoolmarm. Asked if Miss Brightwater was still in town." Mrs. Henley's smile was cruel. "Imagine that, a rich man asking after you by name." The water bucket slipped from Aurelia's nerveless fingers, splashing both women. She mumbled apologies and fled into the schoolhouse, her mind reeling. He remembered her name. He had asked about her. Specifically, she tried to focus on her lessons, but concentration proved impossible. Little Mercy Patterson asked twice if she was feeling poorly, and young William Courtson had to repeat his recitation 3 times before she heard him properly. At noon, as she supervised the children's lunch outside, a shadow fell across her book. She looked up to find Caspian Vale standing before her, hat in hand, looking nothing like the desperate wanderer she'd once helped. His clothes were finely tailored, his boots expensive leather, his once wild hair neatly trimmed. But his eyes, those startling blue eyes, held the same depth she remembered. "Miss Brightwater," he said formally, his voice deeper and more confident than she remembered. "Might I have a word?" Aurelia rose on unsteady legs, acutely aware of her plain dress and practical shoes. "Mr. Vale, we heard you were in town. I came as soon as I could arrange the journey. I've been trying to find a way back to Willowbrook for 2 years. 2 years?" She couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. "The avalanche was 3 years ago. We thought ... I thought you were dead." His face darkened. "I nearly was. Spent 8 months recovering from injuries, another year rebuilding what I'd lost. By the time I was able to send letters, I was told they never reached their destinations. The postal service to these remote areas is ... unreliable." One of her students tugged at her skirt, breaking the tension. "Miss Aurelia, Bobby won't share the checkers." "In a moment, dear." She turned back to Caspian, her heart warring with her head. Your wife seems lovely, she said quietly. Confusion flickered across his features. My wife? The lady who arrived with you last night. Understanding dawned, followed by something that might have been relief. That's Miss Cordelia Ashworth, my business partner's daughter. She insisted on accompanying me for propriety's sake, said it wasn't fitting for a man of my position to travel alone to visit an unmarried lady. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. She's quite firm about proper appearances. Aurelia felt heat flood her cheeks. I see. Do you? Because I've spent 3 years building a fortune with only one purpose in mind, to return to you worthy of what you gave me. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. That night in the storm, when you shared your only bread with a stranger, you saved more than my life. You saved my soul. The school bell chimed, calling the children back to afternoon lessons. Aurelia glanced at her students, then back at Caspian, her world tilting on its axis. I must attend to my pupils, she said weakly. Of course. But Aurelia, the use of her given name sent shivers through her. Would you do me the honor of dining with me tonight? I have so much to tell you, and a question I've carried across 3 territories to ask. That evening, Aurelia stood before her small mirror, trying to tame her dark hair into something resembling elegance. She'd changed clothes 3 times before settling on her best dress, simple blue cotton that brought out her eyes but seemed painfully plain compared to the fashion she imagined Caspian was now accustomed to. A knock at her door sent her heart racing. She opened it to find not Caspian, but a young woman with kind eyes and an expensive traveling dress. Miss Brightwater? I'm Cordelia Ashworth. Mr. Vale asked me to escort you to dinner, if you're agreeable. During their walk to the inn, Cordelia chattered easily about the journey from California, the beauty of the countryside, and her excitement about finally meeting the remarkable woman who's occupied Caspian's thoughts for 3 years. He speaks of you often, Cordelia said as they approached the inn's private dining room. When he was fevered from his injuries, he spoke of little else. The angel with the bread, he called you. Drove the doctors quite mad with his insistence that he had to return to someone in Willowbrook. Inside the dining room, Caspian rose from his chair and Aurelia's breath caught. He'd always carried himself with unconscious grace, but prosperity had added confidence to his bearing. He was undeniably handsome, undeniably successful, and looking at her as if she were the most precious thing in the territory. The meal was elegant beyond anything Willowbrook had ever seen. Dishes that Hoskins must have ordered specially from the city, wines that spoke of serious money. But Aurelia barely tasted any of it. She was too aware of Caspian's presence across the small table, of the way his eyes never left her face, of the nervous energy that seemed to radiate from him. Tell me about your life here, he said. Your teaching, your dreams. So she did, finding herself relaxing as she spoke of her students, her small triumphs and daily challenges. He listened with the same focused attention she remembered, asking thoughtful questions, celebrating her successes as if they were his own. You've built something beautiful here, he said finally, something that matters. I admire that more than you know. And you? The railroad business. His smile was self-deprecating. I had no head for mining, but I noticed the real money was in moving goods and people. I started small, buying broken-down equipment, repairing it, selling it to new prospectors. Eventually, I had enough capital to invest in a railroad spur connecting the mining camps to the main lines. One thing led to another. Mrs. Henley says you're building tracks across half the territory. Mrs. Henley exaggerates, but not by much. He paused, his expression growing serious. Aurelia, I need you to understand something. Every decision I made, every risk I took, every mile of track I laid, it was all to become the man who could offer you the life you deserve. Her pulse quickened. Caspian, I know it seems impossible. I know 3 years is a long time to ask someone to wait. Without word, without promises. But I never forgot the woman who saw a human being worth saving when everyone else saw only a burden. He reached across the table, covering her hand with his. I've come back to ask if there's any chance, any hope at all that you might consider sharing your life with a man who's loved you from the moment you knelt in that muddy street. The room seemed to spin around Aurelia. This moment, dreamed of and despaired of in equal measure, felt surreal. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it. I'm not asking for an answer tonight. I know this is sudden, overwhelming. But I had to tell you, had to ask. His thumb traced across her knuckles. I'll be in town for a week, handling some business with the territorial government about rail lines. That gives you time to decide if a railroad baron can make a schoolmarm happy. Aurelia looked down at their joined hands, his now soft from prosperity, hers still rough from work, but somehow fitting together perfectly. I thought you were dead, she whispered. I nearly was, more than once. But every time I was tempted to give up, I remembered your face in that storm. You gave me more than bread that night, Aurelia. You gave me a reason to survive. Aurelia spent the following days in a haze of uncertainty and wonder. The entire town buzzed with excitement about their famous visitor Caspian had made generous. Donations to the church, promised funding for a new schoolhouse, and charmed everyone from Pastor Whitmore to cranky old Mrs. Henley. Never seen the like, Hoskins confided to Aurelia when she stopped by the inn. Man's got more money than sense, but he's decent with it. Asked about every family in town, wanted to know who was struggling, who needed help. Set up accounts at my place and at Gideon's store for the widow Morrison and the Talbots since their boy got hurt in that mill accident. But it was the quieter moments that made Aurelia's heart race when she'd find Caspian reading to her younger students during their outdoor lessons, his expensive clothes forgotten as he acted out dramatic scenes from their primers, or when she'd catch him deep in conversation with Timothy Fletcher, the man who'd been courting her, both of them laughing as if they'd been friends for years instead of rivals. He's a good man, that Vale fellow, Timothy told her after one such encounter. Asked my intentions regarding you direct-like. When I told him I'd been hoping to marry you, he said he respected that but hoped I'd understand his prior claim. Timothy's smile was rueful but kind. Can't compete with a man who's been carrying a torch for 3 years, Miss Aurelia. Besides, anyone with eyes can see you two belong together. On Thursday evening, Caspian asked her to walk with him along Miller's Creek, the same path where she used to gather berries as a child. The autumn air was crisp, leaves crunching beneath their feet, and the setting sun painted everything in shades of gold. I've been thinking, she said as they paused beside the old wooden bridge, about what you said, about sharing your life. He stopped walking, his whole body tense with hope and fear. And I keep wondering if you really know what you're asking. I'm not the same girl who gave you bread 3 years ago. I've grown accustomed to independence, to making my own decisions. I have opinions about things, strong opinions. I believe women should have the vote, that children deserve education regardless of their parents' station, that kindness matters more than profit, Caspian interrupted gently. That people should be judged by their character rather than their bank accounts, that the strong have an obligation to protect the weak. His eyes twinkled. Miss Brightwater, if you're trying to frighten me away with your radical ideas, you'll have to try harder than that. She laughed despite herself. You say that now, but I'm set in my ways. I like my teaching, my independence. I won't be content to sit in a parlor doing needlework while you build your railroad empire. Good. I'd be disappointed if you were. He took her hands, his expression growing serious. Aurelia, I'm not asking you to give up who you are. I'm asking you to be who you are alongside me. Build schools wherever the railroad goes. Fight for the things you believe in. Change the world, one student at a time, just let me help. And if I said yes, what then? Where would we live? Wherever you want. I can run my business from anywhere the telegraph reaches. If you want to stay in Willowbrook, we'll build the finest house this territory has ever seen. If you want to travel, see the cities and mountains, we'll do that too. The only non-negotiable requirement is that we do it together. Aurelia closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her. In her mind, she saw two paths. The safe, familiar road she'd been walking teaching in Willowbrook, eventually marrying Timothy, raising children in the town where she'd always lived. It was a good life, a respectable life, but the other path glittered with possibilities she'd only dreamed of. Adventures in new places, schools built for children who'd never had such chances, a love that had already proven itself strong enough to survive separation and uncertainty. "There's something I need to tell you first," she said quietly. His hands tightened on hers. "Anything. That night when I gave you the bread, I didn't do it entirely out of kindness. I did it because something in your eyes called to something in mine. Even then, even in that first moment, I felt connected to you. As if I'd been waiting my whole life for you to collapse in that street. Aurelia, let me finish. These 3 years, I've told myself I was being foolish, building dreams on a few conversations and a stranger's promise. But the truth is, I've been yours since that first night. The only question was whether you'd truly come back. And now that I have?" She opened her eyes and found him watching her with such tenderness that her heart nearly broke from the beauty of it. "Now I say yes. Caspian Vale. Yes to the adventure, yes to the unknown, yes to building something extraordinary together." The wedding took place 3 months later on a crisp December morning, with the entire population of Willowbrook in attendance and delegations from 3 neighboring towns, who'd come to witness the union of their beloved schoolmarm and the railroad. Magnate who'd won her heart, Pastor Whitmore performed the ceremony in the new church Caspian had quietly funded, with Cordelia Ashworth serving as maid of honor and Timothy Fletcher, with characteristic grace, standing as one of Caspian's groomsmen. Even Mrs. Henley wept during the vows, though she'd never admit it. "Do you, Caspian Vale, take this woman to be your wife in prosperity and hardship, in sickness and health, for as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Caspian said, his voice strong and sure, his eyes never leaving Aurelia's face. "I have done. Since the night she showed me what it means to be truly wealthy. And do you, Aurelia Brightwater, take this man to be your husband, to love and honor in good times and trials, for as long as you both shall live?" Aurelia thought of the scared, hungry man who'd collapsed in their street 3 years ago, and the confident, generous man standing before her now. But mostly, she thought of the moment when kindness had bloomed between strangers and changed both their lives forever. "I do," she whispered. Their first year of marriage was spent traveling the length of Caspian's railroad network, with Aurelia establishing schools in every town the tracks touched. She'd never imagined education could be her life's work on such a scale. Never dreamed she could impact so many young minds hungry for knowledge. In the mining camp of Silver Falls, she taught children who'd never held a book. In the farming community of Cedar Ridge, she started the territory's first school for girls. In each place, Caspian built not just railroad stations but libraries, hiring teachers Aurelia trained personally. "You realize what you're doing, don't you?" Cordelia asked during a visit to their new home in Sacramento, built specifically to accommodate Aurelia's ever-growing collection of educational materials. "You're changing the West, one classroom at a time." "We're changing it," Aurelia corrected, watching through the window as Caspian reviewed architectural plans for their next school project. "I never could have done this alone. But it was their return to Willowbrook for their first anniversary that truly showed how far they'd come. The town had prospered since the railroad spur had arrived, bringing commerce and opportunity to what had once been a forgotten settlement. The school Aurelia had once taught in alone now employed 3 teachers, and the new library bore a small bronze plaque, dedicated to the memory of kindness shown to strangers. They stayed in the same room above the bakery where Aurelia had lived as a single woman, laughing together at how small it seemed now, how different their lives had become. "Do you ever regret it?" Caspian asked on their last evening as they walked hand in hand past the spot where he'd once collapsed in the mud. "Giving up your quiet life here for all the chaos we've embraced?" Aurelia stopped and turned to face him. This man who'd become her partner in every sense in business, in dreams, in the daily work of building something meaningful together. "Never," she said firmly. "But I do think about that night sometimes. About how different things might have been if I'd walked past like everyone else. I think about it too. About what would have happened to me if you hadn't seen something worth saving in a desperate stranger." "You were never just a stranger," Aurelia said, reaching up to touch his face. "You were the other half of my heart, arriving exactly when I needed you most. I just didn't know it yet." As they kissed beneath the same stars that had witnessed their first meeting, Aurelia reflected on the miracle of their love story. It had begun with bread shared in kindness and grown into something that would outlast mountains, a partnership built on mutual respect, shared dreams, and the radical belief that love could indeed conquer all. 20 years later, when their grandchildren would ask about the secret to lasting happiness, Aurelia would always smile and say, "It started with sharing what little we had with someone who needed it more." Everything beautiful that followed was just love multiplying itself, the way kindness always does when you're not keeping track of the cost. And Caspian, silver-haired and still holding her hand after all those years, would add, "Sometimes the greatest investment you can make is in a stranger's hunger. You never know when that stranger might turn out to be your destiny." The railroad empire they built together eventually stretched across 7 states. The schools they established educated thousands of children who might otherwise have grown up illiterate. But their greatest achievement was the love story itself, proof that kindness, even the smallest act of sharing bread with a stranger, could bloom into something magnificent enough to change not just 2 lives, but the entire world around them. In Willowbrook, where it all began, the bronze plaque still gleams in the morning sun, reminding passers-by that the most extraordinary stories often begin with the simplest acts of human compassion. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, they end with love that lasts forever.